Minister Blair, why can't you tell Canadians how much the gun buyback program is going to cost?
Yeah, well, Carol, it's an important question. I can give them an estimate, and the estimate is it really depends on how many of these weapons are out there. And unfortunately, we don't have a precise understanding of who has them and what they are, simply because there is no registry for many of these guns. But if there are, for example, about 200,000 of these guns, and we've done some work that determines the average brand new retail price would be about $1,300. And so if that number is correct, and it's an estimate at this point in time, we're probably talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million to facilitate a buyback. And through this legislation, we are eliminating all legal use of these prohibited firearms. They can't be legally discharged. You can't fire them. You can't take them hunting or to a range. They can't sell them or transport them. They can't bequeath them or trade them in any way. They will be required to store them in a very secure, safer vault, and we'll prescribe what that safer vault needs to be. They'll also have to acquire a license to possess those firearms and provide us with registration information about the firearms they possess. And that's important, Cheryl, because we want to make sure that we can control and that none of these guns end up in the hands of criminals. And so through this legislation, we're going to gather that information and exercise very strong restrictions against all future use. And then we'll offer a buyback. And I think the vast majority of people who bought these guns to use as firearms, now that there's no legal way to do that, they'll be highly incentivized to surrender them for destruction, and then we'll have a fair compensation program available to them.
Okay, but if they can't, they have to stay under lock and key. If they can't be used, if they're basically out of the system, and it breaks the law to take them out and use them for any purpose, what's the point of Canadians paying $300 or $400 million to buy these back?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, I think these guns represent a very significant risk. That's why we prohibited them. They really have no place in our society. And they have been used in countless jurisdictions, including in Canada, to kill very many people. And we also know that Canadians who purchased these guns did so legally, when it was legal to do so. And so by taking the action of prohibiting them so that they cannot be used, and by introducing the legislation we introduced today, to basically create a very strict, non-permissive regime so that they cannot be discharged, they can't be sold, we are creating the circumstances where the vast majority of people who bought these guns to use as firearms, now that that's no longer legally possible, they'll be highly incentivized to surrender them. And we also think out of fairness that because they were purchased legally, that we should offer fair, not overly generous, but fair compensation for these guns. And for those who may choose to keep them, they'll be fully responsible in the criminal law for their misuse. And in fact, if any of those guns are discharged or sold or transferred or violates any of the conditions we put in place, serious criminal charges can be placed.
And yet, you're not banning handguns. You're allowing municipalities to ban them, but only when the provinces allow for it. And Saskatchewan has already put a ban on banning handguns. Alberta and Ontario don't like the idea. So is it a bit gratuitous to say, yes, we'll have them banned by cities, knowing that the provinces won't let them do that?
Carol, I think there is no greater responsibility for all three orders of government than the protection and safety of their citizens. And so we'll work with municipalities and the provinces to ensure that Canadians are kept safe. But let me be very clear.
Well, can we just stick on this for a second? How is it possible for municipalities to ban these weapons that are a great threat? And you know from having been the police chief in Toronto, how can they do that if the province won't let them?
Well, we will enable them to implement additional regulations. And yes, under the Constitution, the provinces can stop them. And some of them have indicated, that frankly, they're far more influenced, I think, sometimes by the gun lobby than they are by public safety. But we know that there are jurisdictions where the provinces have indicated strong support for the municipalities to take additional measures. And for example, we've heard from the mayor of Vancouver, and I spoke to the Minister of Public Safety, my counterpart in British Columbia, and they are strongly supportive of additional measures to restrict the use of handguns, and that includes their possession, their storage, and their use in their municipalities. And so we'll continue to do that work. But you asked me about banning handguns, Carol, and just to be clear, the only lawful use of firearms in this country are for hunting and sports purposes. And then I will indicate to you there's nothing in this legislation that interferes with those legitimate activities that the vast majority of Canadians engage in responsibly. lawfully and quite conscientiously.
Right, but you saw the value, Minister. You saw the value of banning the assault-style weapons. So you see the value of putting bans on weapons. I'm asking you why not this category of weapons that has caused so much damage with gang-related activities in cities like Toronto.
Carol, all firearms are dangerous, and therefore they need to be strictly regulated. Some firearms, like handguns, are far more dangerous because of their concealability, and therefore they need to be restricted. And we impose very rigorous restrictions, and we've made those restrictions even more rigorous by the legislation we've introduced today. And then finally, there is a number of weapons that have absolutely no legitimate hunting or sporting purposes. Assault rifles that were designed not for hunting, not for sport shooting. They were designed to kill people. They've been used to kill people. And those we have prohibited. And I think that's the appropriate application of the law. I believe that the measures that we've introduced to more severely restrict handguns, to stop them being smuggled into the country, to prevent their theft, and to prevent their criminal diversion, can be effective measures to reduce the availability of handguns in our cities and communities right across the country.
Minister Blair, we'll leave it there. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carol.